Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. My name is Ali and today I'll talk about the history of King's Gambit. The King's Gambit was one of the most popular openings over 300 years and has been played by many strongest players in many of the greatest brilliances, including the Mortal game. Francis Adriano Fielder, the greatest player and theorist of his day, wrote that the King's Gambit should end in a draw with best play by both sides, stating that a gambit equally well attacked and defended is never a decisive game, either on one side or the other. Writing over 100 years later, Sigurd Tarasch, one of the world's strongest players in late 19th and early 20th century, pronounced opening a decisive mistake and wrote that it is almost madness to play the King's Gambit. Similarly, the future world champion Bobby Fischer wrote a famous article, A Bust to the King's Gambit, in which he stated, "In my opinion, the King's Gambit is busted. It loses by force." While the King's Gambit accepted was a staple of Romantic era chess, the opening began to decline with the development of opening theory and improvements in defensive technique in the late 19th century. After World War II, e4 opening became more popular again, with David Bronstein being the first grandmaster in decades to use the King's Gambit in serious play. The King's Gambit is rare in modern high-level play. A handful of grandmasters have continued to use it, including Joseph Gallagher, Hikaru Nakamura, Bhaskaran Adiban, Nigel Short, and Alexei Fedorov. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and good day. My name is Muhammad Shafiq and I'll be explaining on a variation of the King's Gambit. A less likely used move in King's Gambit is the Bishop's Gambit, where after the opponent accepts the gambit, the white bishop is played first as opposed to the popular knight. The move is popularized by Fischer and is sometimes called the Fischer's Gambit, as he took a liking in using the move in tournaments. The move is very strong in controlling the f7 square and sets up for an easy checkmate if the opponent is reluctant to develop their pieces. However, it could backfire on white, as it may leave the king exposed and can potentially cause white unable to castle. Let me demonstrate. So the first move is the pawn, where this sets up for the exception of the King's Gambit, and when black eats the pawn, it signifies that they take the gambit. And then the bishop is moved first as opposed to the knight, and if the queen checks the king, the white king, the king would have to move and they lose the ability to castle. However, if they continue to play, we can see that when the queen retreats, when the knight of white tries to attack the queen, we can play the other white knight and forces the bishop to attack the king straight away. And when we move the knight closer to the king, and black tries to delete his tempo, and white executes a fourth move where the king needs to move. If not, the knight needs to take the castle afterwards. And then black plays the pawn and the bishop closes in to the side, and black develops the pieces for knight, and white tries to play the tempo, and black tries to move the pawn as well. And then we develop the knight for white so that we can move in closer. The white moves the queen, the black moves the knight, and we near the other bishop to the king as well. So we can see that when the game continues, white easily wins with the checkmate in 21 move. We can see if we go back to the starting of the board, this sets up for the bishop gambit as a variation of the King's Gambit. Thank you.
Let's go into the second tactic, which is the King's Knight Gambit, as played by Shirov against Lipensky in the 1990s. Here is the position where a King's Gambit is offered and accepted. Knight to f3, preventing the black queen to h4 check. Pawn to g5, defending i4 pawn and threatening g4. Bishop to c4, pawn to g4, as you can see here. White knight is threatened, but if the knight is moved, it will give chance for the black queen to check, and so castling is the best move. Pawn takes knight, queen takes pawn, queen to f6, pawn to e5 attacking the queen, queen takes pawn. Here, Shirov as white decided to sacrifice bishop and check. King takes bishop, pawn to d4, attacking the queen. Queen takes d4 and check. Bishop to e3, queen to f6 to protect the vulnerable king. Bishop takes pawn f4, kings to e8, looking for a safer spot. Knight to c3, knight to c6, knight to d5 attacking the queen, queen to g6, rook from a1 to e1, bishop to e7, bishop to d6, king to d8, queen to f8, check, bishop takes queen, and here is the checkmate in 1. Bishop takes pawn on c7, checkmate. That's all for the second tactic of King's Gambit accepted. Thank you.
Alright, hello guys, one Alpha here, and in the King's Gambit decline classical defense variation, black would play bishop to his to c5, not taking this pawn, indicating that black declined the King's Gambit offer. White must play his knight to f3. We must not take this pawn here because if we did that, black could play his queen and then it is checkmate for us, or maybe even if we block the check with our pawn here, black could take our castle. So it is a very terrible position for white here. So play our knight instead, and then black would play his pawn to d6, white reply by playing pawn to c3. Black advances knight to f6 with the intention to castle later on. White play pawn to d4, attacking the two pieces at the center. Black takes, white takes, and then black play bishop to b4, checking our king here. Block the check with our bishop, and then black would play his pawn to a5, giving defense to this piece. Do take note that white must not play knight to c3 to block the check, because if we did this, black could take our pawn at e4 and we cannot attack this piece here because we are pinned down by this bishop. Alright, so after that, white play pawn to e5, attacking these two pieces at the center. Black take, white takes, and then maybe even if this bishop here take our bishop, it's completely okay because we could take back with our knight here. So in the end, both sides have equal amount of pieces left. They only lose one bishop and two pawn. However, white have more developed pieces compared to black, and these two pawn and two knight here uh, control the center of the board, and it is very advantage for white here, and it is a very difficult position for black to counterplay. That's all from me. Thank you.
Now, in the King's Gambit, which is this formation right here, if the black pawn decides to take the white pawn at f4, this is called the King's Gambit accepted. And now the most common move for white to do is to move its knight to f3. Now, black has two methods of defense against this move. So one of them could be if black moves its pawn to g5, which is called the classical defense, or it could move, instead of that, it could move the queen's black pawn to d6, which is called the Fischer defense, which I'll be talking about today. Now, this variation of the defense, King's Gambit accepted defense, was popularized by the former world champion Bobby Fischer, where he has won all the 3 tournament games in which he has played this variation, which makes this quite a popular move in professional chess games. Now, the idea behind this variation is to take the e5 square away from the white knight. From the white knight before protecting this one f pawn. Now, using this variation will prevent any complication that arise if the knight is allowed to reach e5 here. For example, let's say we do the other defense mechanism technique. where we move the black pawn to g5. Now, by moving the black pawn here, the white pawn at the rook's pawn, the rook's white pawn could just move forward to attack the black pawn that we just moved to g5, which forces the black pawn to move to g4 to prevent being taken. So in this case, the the white knight can just easily move to e5 and threaten this black pawn here, or whatever else move it may want to do that is difficult for black to handle. So yeah, that's basically the idea behind the Fischer defense. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Liana and I will explain a little bit about the accept defense.
So the classical version is the most played option in the King's Gambit, which black tries to keep the f pawn and secure a material advantage. So the move is e4, e5, and then f4, ex f4, and then nf3 and g5.
It's called classical variation. To start, the white move its pawn forward at e4, and then black does the same by move his pawn at e5, and then white offer his f pawn as a sacrifice, and then if black takes the pawn, this pawn, and white develops this knight, and the blacks protects this pawn at g5. This is called the classical variation.
Hello, I will be explaining about the two types of defense against the King's Gambit when the pawn is declined. So the first defense is the Faulkbeer counter gambit, where pawn at d7 is moved to d5, and from here the most common moves from whites will be knight to f3, and the black pawn will capture pawn at f4, and in return white pawn will capture black pawn at d5, and from here we can see that knight of black can be developed to f6, and so in an attempt to protect the pawn at d5, white knight will move to c3, but as we can see, the black knight can just capture the pawn, and in return the white knight might want to recapture the black knight. However, queen can easily recapture the white knight. So this is the most basic moves that can be done for Faulkbeer counter gambit against the King's Gambit declined.
I will talk about the advantages and the disadvantages. Black needs to know the right way to respond in order not to fall into worse positions. This is a very good advantage. So if the person in front of you doesn't know how to play and how to respond, then you are in a very good position. Second one is King's Gambit has the surprise factor. And third one is take the game into your territory. The other one is King's Gambit will help you improve your tactical and attacking skills. And last one in the advantages is a very fun opening to play actually. So in the disadvantages, of course, we know that we are going to sacrifice a pawn in the second move. And then later, the player with more experience will usually prevail. If you don't have experience and you don't know and you don't have a plan, then you're gonna lose. And thank you.